Now, did you know that nearly 39% of individuals aged 22 to 65 in the UK may struggle to meet basic living costs in retirement? Well, despite the average annual pension income rising to $17,200, many workers, especially the young, self-employed and low to medium earners, just not saving enough. And in this video, we're going to break down the key differences between a defined benefit pension and a defined contribution pension. And later, I'm going to reveal a critical warning about pension transfers, because making a wrong move could seriously cost you your entire guaranteed income. Now folks, before we dive in, I don't know if you know this, but we are currently running a competition and it gives you the chance to win a £100 gift voucher. We're on a mission basically to reach 20,000 subscribers by the end of 2025, and we'd love for you to be part of it. All you need to do is help us spread the word about Reeves. Simply subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, of course, and click the link in the description for the full details on how to enter. Go and check it out. Please don't miss out. You could be our next winner. Back to today's video. Let's begin with some basics. What exactly is a defined contribution pension and how is it different to a defined benefit pension? The value of the fund you're building, either in a current scheme or a historic investment-based scheme, and therefore the income it will ultimately deliver, is not guaranteed in any way. Instead, what you get when you retire depends on how much you and your employer are contributing, how your investments grow over time, that's a very important one, and also the fees which are taken from it, and of course how you decide to spend the pot when you retire. Now, as I've said, the contributions into a DC pension are invested, usually in a fund or a selection of funds, in which case it would be called a portfolio of funds. Now, a fund, an investment fund is what I'm talking about there, will invest usually in a mix of assets. That might be equities, which of course are company shares, might be government gilts or corporate bonds, which is debt either to the government or to a business, and all the growth on your fund is tax-free. You might also get property funds in there, which might invest in residential or corporate property. Now, in most DC schemes, you have some control over where the money is invested, and each scheme will usually have a choice of funds to pick from, and it'll include a default investment option provided by your pension scheme if you can't be bothered to choose or you can't make your mind up. Now, when you decide to access the pension, you've got a decision to make, and maybe even a few decisions. The default, and sometimes the only option, particularly for older investment-based pensions, is to buy an annuity. If you do want an annuity, there should be an open market option, and that allows you to take your pot to the open market and buy the right kind of annuity from the best providers. I'd say it's quite unusual for a particular pension provider to also be the best provider of an annuity, so that shopping around, if it is an annuity you want, is actually really important. So come and talk to us if that's what you really want to do. Alternatively, you might prefer to use Flexi Access Drawdown. This is probably the most common way that people access their pension pots in today's world. It allows you to leave the pot invested and draw an income gradually, and you've got loads of flexibility. You've got 25% of the pot which can be taken out tax-free, and the rest of the pot is taxable when it's withdrawn. And getting the mix of tax-free and taxable wrong will be a very costly and probably irreversible mistake. We've done a detailed video on this, so please check that out when you get a spare minute. This flexibility means you have a lot more choices, but also more responsibility. The risk and reward are all on you. One important thing to remember, the earliest age you can access your pension is currently 55, and this is going up to 57 from the 6th of April 2028 if you were born after 5th of April 1971. So if you're planning to retire early, you do need to factor that into your timeline. Now, a defined benefit pension, or a DB scheme, and sometimes you'll hear them called final salary schemes. These are very different, and here the income you'll get in retirement is defined, hence defined benefit, by the pension scheme rules. That's irrespective of what you contribute, and there is no investment risk to you. Instead of a fixed cash amount, most schemes calculate your income using a formula, though the exact formula will vary between schemes. This formula takes into account a few key factors: how many years you worked at the company, your final or your average salary during that time or over the last few years of employment, and what they call an accrual rate. Thinking about the latter in a bit more detail, let's give you an example. Say you worked for 30 years, your average salary was 30,000, and the company's accrual rate is 1/50. 1/50th. That would be referred to as a 1/50th scheme. You can also get 1/30th, 1/40th, 1/60th and 1/80th. The formula would be 30 years times 1 divided by 50, 1/50th, which equals 60%. You apply that 60% to your average salary over, say, 3 years, and that might mean you get £18,000 a year as a pension income from a particular age, by the way. Typically, you'd get that income for the rest of your life, and defined benefit pensions are offered by employers. You can't just pop out there and enroll into one. At retirement, you can give up some of that annual pension for a tax-free lump sum. It's actually called a pension commencement lump sum, PCLS, and your income will increase over the years roughly with inflation. There's also usually a spouse pension available if you die before they do. Now, you might be at the point where you're thinking, maybe I need a bit more advice on this, a bit more thought. Well, just a quick heads up. Of course, we offer a completely free financial review that costs us over £800 to deliver, and we'll take a deep dive into your pensions, your investments, your assets, your overall finances, and your goals. And we'll get a tailored plan together to keep your retirement on track. All of that's done with no obligation to become a client of Reeves, by the way. Click the link in the description below to learn more. Book your review today, because honestly, folks, you will thank me later. Let's dive deeper now into defined contribution pensions, and I'll go back to DBs in just a minute. Now, DC schemes, investment-based pensions, these are the most common type in the UK private sector today. Many people pay into this without fully understanding what they are, and that does lead to mistakes both straight away when they go into the scheme and also down the line. Now, the biggest advantage of a DC pension is its flexibility. You build a personal pot, and when you reach an age where you want to start and take the benefits out, you decide how and when to do that. You could take lump sums every now and again, you could gradually draw an income, or you could take all of the money and buy an annuity. There's also a big tax benefit. Contributions are made before tax, so for every £80 you put in, the government tops it up to £100. So for basic rate taxpayers of 20%, you'd actually get a 25% increase. If you're a higher rate taxpayer, that's 40% in today's world, or an additional rate taxpayer, 45%, you can claim even more through your self-assessment tax return. But there are some downsides as well. The biggest is the uncertainty. So unlike a defined benefit pension, there's no guaranteed income for life, not unless you buy an annuity. Your pot's value, both eventually and as it's growing over the years, depends on investment performance, on your contributions, on the tax treatment, and also on the costs involved in running that scheme. Now, if the market tanks just before you retire, your pot could shrink dramatically. You also have longer risk. You have to manage how much you withdraw. Once the money runs out, it's gone. Finally, there's the complexity in this type of scheme and the responsibility. You've got to understand your investment choices, both as you're growing your fund over the years and also once you start to access it. And risk levels are important, fees are important, and absolutely the tax efficient withdrawal strategies that you can deploy, because getting that wrong is really, really costly. Now, some people love the control, others find it pretty overwhelming. In summary, a defined contribution pension can be really, really powerful, but only if you actively manage all of its features or you get expert help. Now, back to defined benefit schemes. If you've worked in the public sector, like teaching, the NHS, civil service, or for some really large corporations, you might well have one. If so, you're sitting on a very valuable retirement benefit. The biggest advantage is the certainty that this type of scheme delivers, because unlike a DC or investment-based pension, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get a guaranteed income for life, and it'll be based on your salary and the years that you've worked, amongst a couple of other things. There's no worrying about running out of money at age 82. It's built to last. Now, most DB pensions also include some inflation protection, meaning your income rises to keep pace with living costs over the whole of your lifetime. In today's economy, that is huge. One thing to point out, lots of people refer to old DB schemes that they're no longer a member of as frozen pension schemes. They are not frozen. Generally, when you come out of a DB scheme and you're still a member, you're just not an active member, your benefits to the date that you left continue to grow over the years. So frozen's not really a great term to use. Just a bit of an aside there. There's also something called survivor benefits with the DB scheme. Your spouse or your civil partner can usually receive income after you pass away, and that adds a bit of security and peace of mind to those you leave behind. But it's not perfect by any means. The main drawback of this type of scheme is the lack of flexibility. You can't just dip in and out of your pension whenever you want. Once you start to receive payments from this scheme, they are certain for the rest of your life. There's no ups, down, sideways choices. Now, payments usually start at a set retirement age and come as fixed monthly income. Some appreciate this predictability, but others find it pretty restrictive. Why? Because most people want to spend more in the earlier years of their retirement and less later, especially if you're retiring at 56, 57, 60, 62, and you're going to get state pension at 67. You want to be able to have more in those earlier years, knowing that once state pension kicks in, you don't need as much money from your normal pension pots. That's where the inflexibility of a DB scheme comes into play. However, you don't control the investments and there's no personal pot in your name, so that reduces risk. What it also does though, it means that you can't pass a DB pension down to your children like you could with a DC pension. Now, many people assume that different pension types come with different tax rules, but that's not quite right. Pension income, whether from a DC or a DB, is taxed as income tax. What does vary is how and when you take your money and the element of tax-free cash available. Now, most pensions do let you take up to 25% of your total pot tax-free in the case of DC pensions, that is. That usually means it's pretty straightforward in terms of calculating the lump sum that you want or taking bits of it out over time. You're in control, and that's really good for flexibility. With DB pensions, things are trickier. You receive a fixed income, so if you want to take a tax-free lump sum, it isn't 25% of a specific pot because you don't have a pot, and there's an alternative calculation involved which dictates how much you can get tax-free and how much of your pension income you would need to give up to provide that. It's still tax-free, but it reduces your future income. Even though the lifetime allowance was abolished in 2024, there are new limits. For example, you can only take up to £268,275 tax-free across all of your pension schemes. Now, it would be lovely to be in the situation to have that problem, I think you'll probably be saying. But going over that amount could lead to unexpected tax bills. Another difference to think about: what happens after you die. With DC investment-based pensions, there are different taxation rules depending on whether you die before or after age 75. With a DB, your spouse may receive some of your annual income or be offered a lump sum to replace that, but there is not a pot to pass on as such. You also need to think about the inheritance tax issues when it comes to pensions, and that is also very complicated, and I'm not going to cover it in this, but we do have another video where you can go and check that out. Now, we often get asked, can you transfer a defined benefit scheme to a defined contribution scheme? Well, the answer is yes, but only sometimes, and it comes with some serious considerations. If you're already drawing on a DB pension, you can't transfer it. If you're in major public sector schemes like the NHS, the Teachers Pension Scheme, TPS, Civil Service, Armed Forces, police, firefighters, you cannot transfer those into DC schemes at all, although sometimes you can move them between DB schemes. That's a whole different ballgame. Now, if you're still in the scheme, a DB scheme that is, and you've not yet retired, and your scheme isn't one of those protected public schemes, a transfer might be possible. Now, why would you consider doing this? Well, because a defined contribution investment scheme offers you more control over your investments and more flexibility in terms of accessing your money, even large lump sums. That's particularly useful if you want to spend more in the earlier years and less in the later years. But the trade-off of doing that is huge. You'll lose your guaranteed income for life. If investments perform poorly, your retirement pot might be worth less than you expected, and there's also what they call sequencing risk. If markets fall some point during retirement and you're withdrawing money, well, you'll be taking out more units in your pension than you were when it hadn't dropped, and your pot might not therefore last. Now, financial regulators, the FCA in this case, and the pensions regulator as well, their view is that most people should stay in their DB schemes and retain that security unless there's a very, very strong reason to move it somewhere else. For example, it might be you're in really poor health and you're not going to live that long, and therefore you won't get the value from your DB scheme. That might be a good reason to thinking about switching it and getting that advice. It might be, of course, that you've got several DBs. One's massive and it'll give you all the income that you need, and actually one's really tiny and you'd rather have that to use more flexibility. That might be a good one. The last one I can think of is if you're very, very wealthy and you don't need your pensions at all, you don't need the income that a DB scheme would provide, you might be worth looking at moving that one into something that can be left to your family. Now, if your DB scheme is worth more than £30,000, that's the transfer value, which you can usually get annually for free. It's actually a legal requirement to get advice from a qualified financial advisor before transferring. And yes, that advice will cost you money, but given what's lots at stake. It's very worthwhile if you're interested in doing a transfer. If you're quite happy with the pension benefits that you've got from a DV, just make sure you understand them. We can help you with that, and then we just build it into your plan. Now, be very, very wary, folks, of anybody promising to unlock your pension early or offering ridiculously high returns. That's a common sign of pension scams. So please check the FCA register to legitimize those firms. Come and talk to us. We can spot them a mile off. Transferring out on false promises is not a great idea at all and could leave you with nothing. Don't do it. What's the bottom line? Well, defined contribution pensions offer choice and control, but they come with risks and responsibility and lots of choices to make. Defined benefit pensions offer security, reliability, and generally peace of mind, but less flexibility. Knowing the difference and what suits your situation is vital for securing your financial future. Understanding how defined benefit schemes and investment-based schemes can work together to give you the perfect retirement is key. Now, if this video has helped you clarify what you've got, what you should do, why don't you hit like, subscribe, and leave any questions in the comments. Let's make sure your retirement is built on solid ground. Now that you know the basics, of course, the big question is, how much do you actually need to retire comfortably? Is 100 grand enough, or about 500 grand? Well, in our next video, we're going to dive into a real client story who asked exactly that. Can I retire at 57? I've got 352,000. Are you curious how it turned out? Well, why don't you click here and find out. See you there.